What's up, fuckers? So, this is gonna be another one of my random video topics where I basically decide to talk about random shit. This time, it's gonna be wrestling related. Yeah. Yeah, I actually have, the gameplay footage for the first SmackDown game on the PS1, and I'm actually playing this through my Android, just because I needed some type of video footage to play while I discuss my topic. And I may do more of this in the future, since this is way more easier for me to upload videos. So today I'm gonna talk about why I've always preferred Vince Russo as a mind for the wrestling business over Jim Cornette. Oh yeah, this video is gonna be a very unpopular topic to discuss here, since there's a lot of marks on here that will see it the other way around, and I really don't care. Now, I know that Jim Cornette and Vince Russo seem to have had heat with one another simply because of different viewpoints on wrestling, but most of that heat comes from Jim Cornette, since to me he comes off like such a childish, bitter old man that can't get the fuck over himself. And I know this is all based off of jealousy because Russo did a lot more for the wrestling business than Cornette ever could. And that's a fact. Russo always knew what was best for the wrestling business, but for some reason gets a lot of undeserving hate, while Cornette on the other hand gets less of it. And I'll never understand why. But as a lapsed wrestling fan like myself who understands what wrestling is and what it should be, Vince Russo's vision made a lot more sense for me. And I'm going to tell you why. Now, Vince Russo, as we all know, is the most controversial writer in the history of wrestling, and is also very misunderstood by many. And look, I'm not a mark for the guy, I never will be, but I do have tons of respect for the guy, as he's one of, if not the greatest writer in the history of sports entertainment. And I don't care what anybody says, no one comes to mind, okay? Not Bruce Pritchard, not Jim Cornette, not Stephanie McMahon. Nobody. Although I will say this, Raven Scott Levy, he's the only mind I could think of that could be a writer, and probably be better than Russo, but we don't know. I don't think he ever was a writer for any company, but But yeah, like I said, when it comes to writers in the history of wrestling, no one comes close to Russo. The numbers back it up. He helped revolutionize the business by ushering in the Attitude Era, which saw another boom period for the WWF back in the late 90s. We had Austin versus McMahon, Sable doing sexy shit, the rise of The Rock, DX wreaking havoc, and every single member on the roster feeling like a big deal and having something to do on a weekly basis. Everybody had a character or shtick and was involved in some type of storyline. Now, of course, he gets a lot of negativity for focusing more on story and ratings as opposed to match quality and length. And I've stated this before millions of times, as these fucking retarded marks do not want to understand that wrestling does not sell, okay? Once kayfabe died in the early 90s, once this shit came out fake, once the cat came out of the bag, it became apparent that you could no longer entertain people with just matches, because they already knew it was scripted. I mean, come on. You can't pull over the illusion anymore that what we are watching is real. Those days are gone. That's why by the late 90s, Russo needed to find different ways to get people to watch wrestling, so that way they could keep it relevant and evolve with the times. Traditional wrestling or match quality does not sell, and that's been proven countless times. But no, they want to continue to deny that and make excuses for it, just because professional wrestling is, well, professional wrestling. So therefore, the matches should only be the focus. Right. Even in a real world where people see real combat sports like UFC, we still need to treat a fake sport like wrestling as if it's real. Give me a fucking break. I mean, don't get me wrong, I myself want to see good wrestling also, but you can't have it dominate not just the entire show, but the industry in its entirety. Seriously, this focus on athleticism over entertainment is what's killing the industry right now, and you people don't realize it. And it's been said a million times that larger-than-life characters is what draws. Like Gorgeous George, Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker, Stone Cold, Steve Austin, The Rock. People like them. None of which were stellar in the ring, but they were larger than life, which caused the fans to gravitate towards them in huge numbers. Now look, I can't say that I agree with everything that Vince Russo has done when it came to putting the WCW Championship on David Arquette and then himself. For me, putting the world title on a celebrity wouldn't be the worst idea in the world, but if it's a really popular celebrity and he looks believable like Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever, then that's fine. But David Arquette was a C-list celebrity. I mean, besides playing a cop in a few of the Scream movies, he was not an A-list actor. I mean, if they really wanted good publicity, couldn't they have put it on a bigger name? But then again, WCW were losing money that year, so they probably couldn't afford a huge name like that. And putting the WCW title on himself just made WCW look more second-rate. But he probably regrets it even to this day. Like I said, those are the only things I didn't agree on with Vince Russo. Now, the shit that he gets from people like Bruce Pritchard, Eric Bischoff, and Jim Cornette just proves their jealousy. Especially from Cornette, but don't worry, I'll get to him. I mean, they really can't get the fuck over themselves to admit that a casual fan ripped up the rulebook and made the entertainment platform that they love so dearly into one of the most talked about shows and events on the planet. He will never be fully appreciated for what he accomplished, which is a crying shame. Fans lambast how creativity bankrupt WWE is currently and yearning for the Attitude Era to return, all the while bashing Russo for a hopeful job as a writer. Oh, the irony. I mean, come on people, the reason why the WWF and TNA had good ratings was because Russo approached these shows not as wrestling shows, but like TV shows. He knew no one really cared about fake fighting, so the matches on TV were short and the characters were protected. Hell, even when he wrote for WCW at the end of 1999, ratings were going up. Russo was a terrible writer for WCW in 2000. Yeah, and was he really to blame for that? Or was it the toxic environment filled with egos, creative control, and aging stars refusing to do the job for younger talent? Seriously, Russo had both hands tied behind his back when he headed back for Atlanta. And try as he might, there was just no saving the sinking ship. At least when Vince Russo got there, he tried to make things interesting. Go back in history and have a look at the ratings, which steadily rose in the first 6 weeks under the pen of Vince Russo. The guy knows how to create interest in a dead product, whether you like him or not, okay? You know, pushing all your favorites like Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Dean Malenko was not gonna do anything, okay? It was not. They couldn't draw worth a shit. Ratings were going down when they were on television. Get over it, okay? It's just facts. Average people do not want to watch traditional wrestling, okay? If you've ever lived outside the wrestling bubble, you would understand that. Vince Russo was never all about that. Hell, even the cruiserweights in WCW got stale after a while. I mean, come on, there's only so much flips and kicks you can watch until it gets repetitive. I mean, yeah, it was pretty revolutionary at first, but by 99, people stopped caring. So just stop it. Nobody cared about all these boring fuckstains like Billy Kidman and Juventud Guerrera and fucking Psychosis and all these other flippy floppy Mexican motherfuckers in mask. And that's why Vince Russo had to have the entire division revolve around Evan Courageous, Medusa, Daphne, and some fucking guy named Oklahoma. I mean, at least he tried to make it somewhat interesting because nobody cares about gay flippy Mexican guys in mask doing flips when people have seen it so many fucking times. Like, seriously, nobody cares for that shit besides gay autistic nerds. But enough about that. Hell, like, I could even go on about how he wrote for early TNA when they were doing that sports entertainment extreme angle. In my opinion, he wrote what was TNA's best storyline at the time being. This is back when TNA were doing weekly pay-per-views. I remember as a teenager around that time they used to come on Wednesday nights, and the price would be around like $9.95. And at that time I still bought WWF, e-pay-per-views, so I sporadically bought them in 2003, and then in early 2004 I started buying them weekly. The weekly pay-per-view era was my favorite era for TNA. You know, no commercials, and just a lot of really fun shows every single week. I've even asked Russo on what he thought of the angle, and he said it was the most fun he's had in wrestling. And I can definitely see why. You had a few WWF, WCW, ECW, and even a few up-and-coming stars like AJ Styles and Triple X getting involved in what was a big storyline. Plus, you had a lot of these hot chicks dancing like strippers in the stage area. Oh man, that was a pretty cool and underrated time for TNA. Oh man, and one of my favorite moments was Raven's debut after Jeff Jarrett beat Chris Daniels to retain the NWA World title, thus stealing the belt from Jeff Jarrett and the NWA. You know, most of you who are young or probably didn't watch TNA during that time wouldn't know about it, because back then TNA didn't even have a TV deal. This is all before Spike TV, but you know, that era was great, man. They probably could have been bigger than they were. But then Dixie Carter and John Gaborick came in there and fucked it all up. Now, you may be asking, oh well, if Vince Russo is so good at what he does, then how come he couldn't make TNA a viable competitor to WWE? Well, it's maybe because they were horrible at promoting and financially operating the company. And the talent just didn't have the entertainment value or natural charisma as a Steve Austin, Hogan, Savage, Goldberg, a Warrior, a Batista, or a Rock. The only guy I felt could have been a star during the times I still cared about watching TNA was the alpha male Monty Brown. You know, that guy could have been TNA's version of The Rock. But then they turned him heel, which killed his momentum in popularity. They aligned him with Jeff Jarrett, and then by 2006 they released him, or he quit or whatever. Besides, when Russo was in charge of the creative during TNA's Spike TV years, the ratings were actually pretty good for TNA, and business was pretty good. But once Russo got released, the ratings declined. Ratings declined and Spike TV ended their deal with TNA. Thus, they were forced to jump to numerous networks. I mean, it's no coincidence that wrestling is at an all-time low when Russo is not part of the business.
My duties as a wrestling TV writer is to assure there are as many eyeballs watching the product as possible. Because whether you want to admit it or not, in this business, everything is ratings. Because again, if you were the writer of this show, we would have a 2-hour wrestling match that nobody would watch, Mike. And you're the only one, and if I leave this business in your hands and people like you, there won't be a TNA. And you know what my vision is? I want my boys to be able to make a living in this business. But in order for that to happen, Mike, this business needs to be around. And if it continues to go the rate that you want it to be, and these jackasses at NWA are going, and Vince McMahon and his, I don't even know what that is on Monday nights going, there won't be a wrestling business, not 5 years from now, 1 year from now, Mike. And you know what? Don't say another word, because when all's said and done, you're going to be thanking me, and you're going to be kissing my big ass, Mike.
Oh, brother. And even watching that work shoot interview he had with Mike Tenay, which, by the way, fuck Mike Tenay, it's more relevant than ever before, because all of the predictions that Vince Russo made came true. Like, that interview came out around 2002 or 2003, and looking back at it now, he was right. Look at how much we've fallen. Tradition 1 and all the programs now are being catered more and more to the small percentage of wrestling fans, as we know, to being the fucking smarks, who for one does not want the business to evolve, and does not care if everybody doesn't have a character or a storyline. They just want pseudo-athletes, and that's it. Well, congratulations. And now less people are watching wrestling more than ever before. The ratings reflect that.
Oh, but ratings don't matter.
Okay, whatever you say, but let me just say this. When things start to look really bad, don't blame anybody else for that. You know, obviously there are still those who blame the man for supposedly killing WCW, seemingly because of blind hatred. Oh my goodness, he turned WCW into sports entertainment. That's why WCW died. That's not the fucking case, dumbass. Even before Russo came to WCW, AOL Time Warner had already made plans to cut wrestling from their channels. Believe it or not, but one man couldn't sink an entire company by himself. It was a combination of having a very deep roster, having multiple wrestlers with huge salaries attached to them, and some of those wrestlers were sitting at home collecting their guaranteed paychecks. The company was hemorrhaging money way before Russo ever got there. So believe whoever you want to believe. But if you think that even 2 decades later that one man could be responsible for putting a company out of business simply because he doesn't follow your traditional views on wrestling, you losers seriously need to get the fuck over yourselves and get your facts straight. If anybody's really to blame for WCW's demise, it's Bischoff. Yes, Eric Bischoff and his overspending killed World Championship Wrestling. Like, he just blames Vince Russo because he has to have a fall guy. And Russo just sits there and takes it. That's not fair to him. All Russo ever wanted to do was help the wrestling business stay profitable. But nope, of course, to all the marks out there, to the Bischoffs, to the Meltzers, to the Cornettes, he's the bad guy. Oh my god, that mindset is so fucking disgusting. I mean, seriously, we really need to appreciate Russo. Like, when I look at the WWE product today, and I see that it mostly attracts geeks and beta SJWs. The women campaign is one of the most embarrassing things in the history of wrestling, and you're trying so hard to push a lot of these cringeworthy performers like Becky Lynch, New Gay, fucking Seth Rollins, because of a desperate social media campaign. And in the process, along with indie wrestlers getting in positions they should have never been close to, sacrificing the entire mass general audience who they killed year after year in the last decade. Not a lot of people actually realize how much time, creative, and investment you need to produce a product like Russo did. Everything was done in advance. Now they don't have anyone there with the creative mind or willingness to invest time to create this type of character development. The fact that you people can't appreciate that is why the business is not evolving. Oh my god, that mindset. Fuck anybody with that mindset. Oh, and another thing. Going back to the whole sports entertainment extreme angle, that's exactly how the business should have evolved after the Attitude Era. I forgot to mention that the one thing I really enjoyed about the angle was that it was more reality-based. You know, everything was a shoot. Everything was real. And it felt real. You know, the whole Roddy Piper saying, "Russo, you killed Owen Hart." Or like fucking Mike Tenay and Vince Russo having that whole work shoot interview about how he killed the WCW and all that other shit. And people might think, oh, we shouldn't go there because it exposes the business. Dude, everybody knows wrestling is fake. Well, like, I don't want to say fake, but like, everybody knows it's scripted. So why are you still embracing the fact that it's all a work? Make it look legit. Make it look real. You know, and that's honestly my big problem with, you know, the business nowadays. It feels so scripted, man. And that's the one thing I did love about TNA during their Asylum years. It wasn't just the fact that it was cutting edge. It felt real. Kind of like the whole Matt Hardy and Edge and Lita Love triangle. You know, they took real life drama and just turned it into a storyline. You know, the whole thing with Matt Hardy calling in on Lita on Bite This. You know, that felt real. But it was all work. You know, having Scott Steiner shooting on Ric Flair back in 2000. You know, Paul Heyman to shoot on Vince McMahon, like, the SmackDown before Survivor Series. You know, and all that other cool shit. And it's not just that, but, you know, give us more controversial and offensive storylines. You know, give us shock value, hot chicks, vulgar language. You know, give us a cutting-edge product that feels real. You know, and not this feminist-oriented series of acrobatic performances that only the marks can appreciate. Like, seriously, enough with this generic guy number 1 versus generic guy number 2 for 30 minutes. You know, give us some cool shit. Bring back the chaos, you know? That's what's really gonna make people want to watch. And that's exactly what Vince Russo wanted to take wrestling in the new millennium. And he knew what he was doing. But unfortunately, Jeff Jarrett didn't want to go down in that direction once they went to Fox Sports. You know, like, as I heard from Vince Russo, he wanted to make it more sports-based, because I guess he just wasn't comfortable with the whole idea. But it is what it is. And that, for me, was TNA's real downfall. It wasn't Hogan and Bischoff coming in 2010. No. It was TNA ending the sports entertainment extreme angle way too quickly. And not going in that direction. You know, he even talked about it in an interview about his vision for wrestling in the new millennium. And that would have been it, you know? That was way ahead of its time. And had a TNA gone in that direction, they could have been huge. maybe even better than ECW or the Attitude Era. This is where the business should have went to. But because we live in a business full of marks who are way too afraid of going outside of the wrestling bubble and doing something different, we get the same old shit. Instead of taking 10 steps forward, we take 20 steps back. Ugh. But I may talk about the sports entertainment extreme angle for another video. But when it comes down to it, Vince Russo will go down in history as, for me, the most controversial and creative writer in history. And that's all I have to say about that. Now let's talk about Corny over here. Now look, as an on-screen personality when he was a manager, I thought he was great. He had excellent promo skills and he was just good at what he did, both as a manager and a commentator. Especially when I was getting into wrestling in '96 and saw what he was doing as a manager for Vader, I couldn't take that away from him. However, as a mind for the wrestling business, I find Corny to be incredibly overrated. And again, I'll never understand for the life of me why someone like Vince Russo gets all the hate but Cornette gets less of it. Because I feel as though Cornette is as out of touch with professional wrestling as anyone else, if not more. Like I said, I respect him as a manager, but I more so don't agree with his views on wrestling. At least Russo understood that wrestling is a show and that you had to find ways to keep the audience's attention, while Corny on the other hand sees it as more of a sport, when people have known since the 80s and 90s that wrestling was scripted. Kayfabe was dead, which meant you couldn't go back to the illusion anymore that what we are watching is real. And I'm specifically talking about the matches that take themselves way too seriously as if they're trying to present a real sport. That's why people will never be able to get into all these indie work rate matches that losers like Dave Meltzer and Bryan Alvarez overrate. And let's not forget about his opinions on ECW, the Brian Pillman gun segment, and his feelings towards a lot of stuff that happened during the Attitude Era with all the Jerry Springer Crash TV stuff they did during the late 90s. While business in the 90s was moving in one direction and trying to evolve with the times, Cornette was still stuck in his 70s and 80s mentality and still thought it needed to go exactly by that again. And I could honestly see why he was replaced by Russo twice, both in WWF and TNA. The man just didn't want to evolve with the times in wrestling. And he's usually the first person to shit on anything in pro wrestling that was or is more successful than anything he ever did and didn't involve him, when he fails to realize that people watch wrestling as a TV show. They don't care if the actual wrestling is real because they know it's fake. Just make it good and compelling and they will tune in. But if you want an answer to what people want to see more out of in wrestling, just look at the Lana and Bobby Lashley wedding segment. And look, I don't watch WWE anymore, but I saw the segment on YouTube. And to me, after watching it, it was bad. And it's definitely not the type of a storyline that I would go for. But it got a lot of people talking. And that's all that matters. People want to see shit that keeps their eyes glued to the TV screen. And that's what Russo did best, whether you like him or not. Hell, when Corny ran Smoky Mountain Wrestling in the early 90s, we all know that didn't last long. I mean, you could make up the excuse that business was down in '95 because of them being a smaller promotion than what WWF and WCW were. But at the same time, how does that explain ECW surviving that year? I mean, come on, weren't they also a small promotion? They were growing in popularity that year, especially with the Raven and Tommy Dreamer rivalry taking off that year. And this was back when the access to their programming was very limited. And I didn't know about ECW until '97 when the whole Raw invasion happened. But as someone like myself that lived through '95, it's like Bischoff said, it was kinda hard to find the ECW access. Like, ECW used to come on at 1 o'clock in the morning on MSG, and this was back when there was 30 channels on TV back in '95. But, I'm getting off topic here. The point is, nobody wanted to watch Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I mean, it was incredibly bland, not innovative, uninspired, and mediocre. To me, it was almost like he was trying to relive the 70s and the 90s, and it just wasn't gonna work. Fans by that point in time have changed, and I can't blame them for not wanting to watch, because almost all traditional wrestling is fucking boring crap. And yeah, flashy shit is overused in wrestling, but it's still more entertaining than seeing some dickhead work a hold for over an hour. Call me disrespectful to old school wrestling, and even though I hate a lot of these spot fest matches you'd see nowadays in the indies or anything in wrestling these days, since the business has become more about the flips than the entertainment aspect, but if I had to choose, I'd rather watch a spot fest with guys like Young Bucks, cause at least it's a lot easier for me to sit through it. And again, I hate those types of matches. Yes, the wrestling needs to evolve, but you gotta have some storytelling to go along with it. Cause I'll be honest, and I am guilty of this too, I do love watching a good spot fest match here and there, cause then I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy a lot of the TLC matches from the Hardy Boys, the Dudleys, and Edge and Christian. And even the matches that Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn had back in ECW. But that's not all I want from wrestling. If you ask me, I care way more about the business being cool again than some cringeworthy gay nerd fest where the only thing it has going for it is wrestling, and no interesting characters for me to get behind or storylines for me to get invested. What I'm trying to say is that wrestling should not be one-dimensional. It should be more than just, well, wrestling. It's like Mike Landis said in his video, wrestling isn't wrestling. But of course for Jim Cornette, he doesn't see it that way, as it's supposed to be, well, let's say it in the words of Jim Cornette himself. Goddamn motherfucker, it's not real wrestling, it's supposed to be a goddamn sport. The old man just can't get the fuck over his overly conservative-like views on wrestling. He just could not get over his love for 70s and 80s wrestling. Oh well, it's traditional, yeah well, at the same time the wrestling business needs to evolve. When Smoky Mountain Wrestling closed its doors, we lost nothing. The younger fans were craving for something more edgier and a lot more unpredictable than the typical good guy on his white horse versus the bad guy in his black trunks formula that Cornette had in mind. You watch Smoky Mountain Wrestling and you can tell that after one match the entire promotion was way too old school and not in a good way to be a successful business. If this is what Cornette wants all wrestling to be, then he could have easily killed the business with his boring southern wrestling bullshit. It's no wonder Smoky Mountain Wrestling went under. Corny had no idea that people were not interested in his outdated wrestling anymore, and he still doesn't. Smoky Mountain Wrestling, living or dying, had no real effect on the wrestling business. Just like how a lot of these indie promotions like Ring of Honor had no effect. And I could honestly care less if I would have heard all these small promotions closing doors. And it might very well happen with us still going through this pandemic. I mean, at least it would spare me the headache from listening to a lot of these smarks go on about NXT and all these indie vanilla midgets. Ugh. And I can't believe a lot of you faggots out there aren't smart enough to see that Triple H is single-handedly raiding the indies. Like, he's basically taking all of the top stars, and you aren't smart enough to see that he's basically killing the indies. The same way Vince McMahon killed all of the territories. But oh my god, I'm getting way off the topic, but but I just couldn't help but bring it up. But, and yeah, maybe Heyman lost more money than Cornette, but it does not defeat the biblical fact that Cornette could never do what Heyman was able to do. And no, I am not a Paul Heyman mark, cause the man is not what he used to be. But with ECW, it got over with the hardcore and cutting-edge atmosphere because WCW and WWF went too far left with the goofy presentations, while ECW went far right and provided a correction in how wrestling should be presented. The man just sounds jealous that ECW was light years more successful than Smoky Mountain Wrestling, which is honestly nothing more than a footnote in wrestling history. But when it comes down to Jim Cornette, he comes off like the parent that bitches about their kids' music. I mean, come on, if Jim Cornette was 20 years younger, he would have been right in the thick of participating in it. Everyone knew it was unsustainable. Just like music. You had your Elvis, couldn't last forever. Then you had your Beatles, and then they were gone. It was a seed. It grew, and if you were there at that time, it was great. For what it lacked in tradition and production values, it had passion. The fans were loyal, and that's why I keep comparing it to music. Like, you had the punk rock thing in the 70s, and then grunge in the 90s. It was organic and it grew. There wasn't any virtuosity to it. There were a bunch of guys who knew they couldn't do it like Eddie Van Halen did. Not many people can. So they stripped it down, made a noise, and had passion for it. That was the draw. And I think the hardcore stuff is like that. Kind of like ECW. Jim says he can't figure it out. Well, it's really not that hard to figure out unless you're a grouchy old man. While I have nothing but the deepest respect for Jim Cornette because of his knowledge, experience, and intelligence, and I do give him credit for managing some decent tag teams, but now I feel he's pretty much resorted to bitching about anything and everything he feels is wrong about the wrestling business. Which I do agree with, because wrestling nowadays is complete shit. And a lot of the stuff that you fanboys mark out for, like the Joey Ryan penis spots and Invisible Man matches, is just stupid. And shit like this is what's gonna keep the business dead. Like, seriously, you fans have horrible, pathetic bowel movement taste, man, seriously. Dude, what has wrestling come to? Thank God I don't watch anymore. But at the same time, he's still just a stuck-up old man who refuses to evolve with the times in wrestling, and is basically against any wrestling company doing something different, whether it's good or bad. And that's how I see it. So that's pretty much what I have to say in this video. Russo is way better than Cornette. I don't want to hear it, but if you agree with this video, let me know down below. But anyways, fuckers, I'm out. Later.